Hey there, Aligned You listeners. This is Dr. M here, and welcome to our Aligned and Thriving season and series of interviews. I am super pumped to be sharing a series of stories and interviews with some amazing humans. People, some who I've admired from a distance for a long period of time, others who I know personally and call dear, dear friends, and feel very privileged to do so. This series is designed to actually dive deeper into what allows them to truly live an aligned you life and to be thriving, whether that's in their work life, their home life, or their play life, and working out truly, is there common themes or is everyone different, and we really do all reach our full potential in our own unique way. Enjoy this season. I've had an absolute pleasure and joy recording it. I'm your host, Dr. M, and you're listening to Aligned You, a podcast designed to assist you to truly be aligned through your body, head, and heart so you can reach your full potential in your own unique way. Hey there, Aligned You listeners, Dr. M here, and welcome to this week's episode. I am super excited. I'm absolutely pumped today because today is the first of a new interview series where I get to dive deeper into topics that will help you to continue to align your body, head, and heart so you'll be able to release your potential in your own unique way with world-class leading experts. On today's episode, I am super excited to have the amazing folks, Dr. Andrea Huddleston, who is a women's health natural fertility specialist and an integrative chiropractor. She practices in Perth. I think she's in Fremantle, aren't you? You still in Fremantle? Yeah. In Fremantle, Perth. She's a co-host of the award-winning podcast Wellness Women Radio. Now, I had to practice saying that before, folks, because try saying that fast 3 times. It's a little tricky, but Wellness Women Radio. Didn't even need to pop my teeth back in. She's affectionately referred to as a period whisperer by her patients. In addition to her chiropractic degrees, Dr. Andrea holds 2 postgraduate degrees because one wasn't enough, and has a master's degree in women's health medicine, reproductive medicine. She's also trained in nutritional and functional medicine. She's a global leader in women's health as well as an educator and sought after presenter. I am super excited, very blessed to have her online, and it's a bit lucky when you've got certain people on speed dial when you have questions to say, hey, Dr. Andrea, will you jump on the mic with me for a little bit of time? Welcome to Aligned You.
Oh, Maria, thanks so much for having me. And man, I love that energy that you just brought then.
You're welcome.
It's so weird. When people that you have such affection for, and that, you know, Maria, you and I have known each other for ages, but then when you introduce me like that, it like makes me feel it's so cringeworthy.
Oh, no, never. Do you know what? If I can offer you something, take it or leave it. It never cringe because it's truth. It's like when people saying, oh, you're boasting, but it's actually not boasting because it's just the goddamn truth. Somebody said to me the other day, you might appreciate this, is that they were saying, you have a lot of cool people in your life. And I'm like, yeah, no, I collect interesting people. Haven't you realized? And they went,
sure do.
Yeah, you do. And I was like, yeah, I do. It's on purpose. And it doesn't mean that I was trying to think about it. I reckon we met in 2017 in the Barossa Valley at a Lawrence Tam event. I reckon would have been the first time that you and I met. So it's a few moons ago. Yes. And it's one of those things within chiropractic circles. Depending on which circles you're swimming in, you come across very interesting people. And the interesting ones I keep. The other ones I let go. So you're definitely a keeper, Dr. Andrea.
Oh, thanks, Maria. It's such a mutual admiration society here. I feel the exact same about you. And Maria, you've done such incredible things since I saw you last, including getting married. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. I got divorced and married since I saw you last. So amazing things happen. It's been a big few years. It definitely has been a big few years. And I think the last time I saw you in person would have been at the Wellness Summit in 2019. So pre-lockdown. Yes. You and your beautiful hubby were saying, I think we were in Geelong. I think you were heading back into town to go see your beautiful hubby, who I think you guys were relatively newly married at that point.
Yes.
Am I remembering correctly, or am I just making shit up?
No, you're absolutely remembering correctly. And it feels like so long ago because obviously the world changed for a good part of the time between now and then.
Yes.
And it was funny. I was at the Wellness Summit, doing a whole bunch of teaching and speaking and everything around that time. And Dean had flown over to Geelong to see his family. And I was going to see him very briefly, between essentially speaking gigs, and he'd come into town to see me, and I was going to go out to the like speakers dinner, but Dean was in town.
Yeah.
And Marcus Pierce pulled me aside and he said, Andrew, what are you doing? Go and see your husband. I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. I believe I had that conversation with you and I went, go talk to MP.
I know.
Yes.
You did. And it was just funny how you just get in this a cycle of just doing all these obligatory things just because, you know, you think you have to. But then, yeah, and he really appreciated me just like ditching everything that night and just spending time with him. So that was the right.
Well, oh, absolutely. Well, I think it's never let it be said that I'm not good at poking other people into the right direction. Sometimes I need to prod and push it for myself. But when it comes to our priorities and values, which the Aligned You listeners hear me talk about all the time, really important to have those the right way up to light you up. And for some of it's the actual top priority is our work and it's our vocation, but making sure we're looking after those people that we love the most is so important as well. But we could talk about that all day. I've only got you for limited time, so I want to dive in and I'm going to let you know about why I reached out when I reached out. So folks, some of you who have been listening to Aligned You, it had a little bit of a hiatus earlier in the year. And part of why I basically had 6 months off from podcasting was I was personally suffering from I don't mind swearing on my podcast, Dr. Andrea. I hope it doesn't bother you, but I had some really shit brain fog for 6 months and it really stopped my creativity. And part of why I was having brain fog, folks, was because I am technically still in perimenopause because I have had a period in the last 12 months. Dr. Andrea is going to explain more about that, what determines what. But I just found that the brain fog was real. And in my igniting Aligned You, which part of the reason why, and I haven't shared this with Andrea yet, part of the reason why I started recording again was to make my brain work again. I was not accepting the fact that it was not working. So God damn it, I will record every week, even if it comes out like gobbledygook, which it hasn't, folks. But even if it does, I'm still doing it because if you don't use it, you lose it. But it was an inspiration point of conversations I was having with quite a few of my peers of a similar age or a similar hormonal pattern at the moment, is that there was a lot of misinformation around. There's a lot of bullshit around that, particularly on Insta and Facebook. There's a lot of geared information towards making you feel bad about where you are in life versus, hang on a second, there's some processes going on here. What can we actually do about them? What are the best baselines to measure? What are the best solutions or pathways or people to see? And I thought rather than me just talking shit, I would get some experts onto Aligned You, like the brilliant Dr. Andrea Huddleston, to actually be able to ask people who know what they're talking about in great depth to be able to share with you guys, because I know I'm not Robinson Crusoe as far as this is concerned, and having conversations with women who are clients who are through the other side of menopause, where they're actually saying as well, no one actually spoke about this stuff. And so that's one of the inspirations behind this particular series around hormones, whether it's perimenopause, the impacts of it, menopause, and also endometriosis, which I've never suffered with, but my beautiful wife suffered severely with it for 2 decades. And what I think there's something so powerful about the lived experience, but also the living with somebody experience that I never really got it till I saw her writhing around in pain. But anyway, that's the premise of today, Andrea. So where would you like to start? Is there an order? I think so. Is there an order that you think makes most sense if we're going to dive into these 3 topics? Is there one that should precede the other as far as you're concerned?
Oh, I love the idea of let's just start with perimenopause and that menopausal transition, and then we'll sort of circle back to endometriosis because, Maria, I feel like if we start on endo, we may not.
We might need a second episode. Fair.
Yeah, exactly. And I love what you said about the, this kind of no man's land that is perimenopause. And look, it certainly does not seem like you have brain fog by any stretch of the imagination, but we can get into the reasons why some women experience that. For such a long time, this period or transition in a woman's life was so misunderstood. And I do think that that's still true now. I don't think that, anybody has all the answers, but there certainly needs to be a lot more clarity around it. And perimenopause is essentially the transition zone from cycling during your, fertile years to the time up until menopause. And menopause is simply a retrospective diagnosis. So it just means 12 months without a menstrual period. And from then on, then that's menopause, and then essentially the post-menopause. And So perimenopause can last anywhere from 5 to 13 years.
Oh, fuck me. My French, Jesus,
That's
thanks.
normally the response I get from my patients when they say, how long is this going to go on for? And I'm like, well, somewhere between, 5 to 13 years. And in my opinion, the longer we can keep women cycling for, the better. I really think that the longer you ovulate for, the longer you keep menstruating, it just has such good health benefits on the other side of that. But most women will notice a shift in their hormones from about 35 onwards. But then the average age of the start of perimenopause is about 45 or 46. So the pre-perimenopause sort of time frame, or the sort of clinically significant shift in hormones, can start even 10 years before perimenopause actually begins. And from a medical perspective, perimenopause has only just been officially acknowledged in, gynecological teachings and textbooks as a distinct hormonal time in a woman's life. Isn't that crazy that it's only
How fascinating. Well, no wonder no one's talking about it, because no one knew about it. Wow.
Exactly. And a lot of the time, we can sort of think about this as almost like a woman's second puberty, because this is this is the time where women will experience the most amount of hormonal variation and can have very significant and tumultuous symptoms where they can feel like they're going crazy because they're in this sort of window of they're maybe having periods, but they know essentially they're not fertile anymore, so they can't necessarily conceive, sort of, but they're not at menopause yet, but they're having all the symptoms that we normally associate with menopause, like hot flushes, brain fog, like you mentioned. Some women will experience significant weight gain during perimenopause as well, and that's incredibly disturbing for them. They can have huge mood changes, and the most common mood that women will present to me with is rage, like sometimes this uncontrollable anger and rage that they're experiencing. They might have changes in their libido, vaginal dryness, vaginal atrophy. They might be getting huge night sweats as well. So not just hot flushes during the day, but they might be getting night sweats too. They often will have changes to their actual menstrual cycle as well. So they might have this new onset of very significant premenstrual symptoms, or like the classic PMS symptoms that they've never had before. And they'll feel like they're turning into a crazy woman because all of a sudden their whole body has just changed. And they'll often say things like, I don't recognize this body. I'm storing fat in places I never have before. I'm putting on weight. I can't shift weight. My diet and exercise has been unchanged, but my body is not, responding the same way that it used to. They might be getting shorter menstrual cycles as well. So instead of having, say the textbook 28 to 30 day period, it might be coming every 25 or 21 days, and they might be getting heavier bleeding as well with other symptoms like headaches or migraines in that sort of premenstrual or during menstruation. And that's just, a drop in the ocean of the symptoms.
Look, time. It's as if you've been living in my body for the last 2 years. It's so interesting, and we were talking off air about that different shocks can actually speed up when this all comes on. And when you were talking about age, I was like, yes, my 46th birthday earlier in the year, when all of a sudden I had to start holding pieces of paper further away from me to be able to read them, even though I've worn glasses since I was 8. But then all of a sudden I had to come to terms with I might need reading glasses today. But I refuse to not be aging well. And so there's different, strategies I put in place to be able to manage the shift in my body, the shift in my energy, the shift in my clarity. So thank you for thinking that I don't sound like I have brain fog. I think you would relate to this, and many listeners would, when you have a brain that goes at 1,000,000 miles an hour when it's at its best, for it to even go at 97% of that is annoying. Because what I used to be able to do in certain time frames, I actually have to leave myself a lot more time, which still most people go, that's not enough time. But for me, it's a lot more time. So it just shifts up how I can plan and expand my week. But given all of that, and given that it's so new in terms of coming up in research papers and things like that, And I'll reflect on a personal experience of speaking to my GP about some of the stuff was going on, and should I get a hormone panel? She went, no need. You've still got a menstrual cycle. And I was like, okay, didn't seem quite right, but again, hence this interview series. What would be your point of call for people in terms of when and who should they be seeing if they're noticing any of those symptoms? Because to me, and certainly when we put our chiropractic vitalistic hats on and a vitalistic philosophy, is that we want to be functioning at our best, not just waiting for symptoms to kick off to just be treating symptoms, right? So, and this is where I'm struggling to find great information about how to do that versus, Siri hearing me and hearing that I've put on some kilos in new places that never stored weight before. And now I'm getting all these weight loss pills coming up that are geo-targeted to me that are going to make me happy or hormonal. I have a feeling you might have some opinions about those, but I'd love to get some more information about what are the right strategies. Where should we be going? Who should we be speaking to? And what sort of panels, blood tests or others should we actually be asking for that are available in Australia? Because I follow quite a few American doctors and integrative doctors and chiropractors, and they've got access to stuff we don't necessarily have access to, as far as I can tell. Happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah, Maria, let's unpack that because there was a bunch of questions there.
Oh, yes.
So I want to make sure that I cover that because I think that's really important. Your experience, unfortunately, with your GP is so common, like, oh, you're still having a menstrual cycle, no need to test anything. I wholeheartedly disagree because and maybe it's just because I'm inherently a major nerd and I love reading, analysing and, really diving into patients' tests. So I love looking at labs and their pathology and explaining them to them so that they can see exactly what's going on with their hormones in their body at that time. And we can also look at that and go, okay, so this is what your hormones are showing right now. You are nowhere near menopause. So that means that the symptoms you're having right now are going to be going on for a long time. Let's see what we can do about that, for example. What I would recommend is working with someone who they absolutely know what they're doing when it comes to hormones is really the most important thing. And that could be a really great GP. It could be a naturopath or a herbalist. It could, is someone like that, just a women's health expert in their field who really understands, perimenopause and menopause because it is so distinctly different to, a menstruating woman, for example. I really do like
Can I ask you a question? What would be your questions, obviously other than your brilliant self, because you can't see everybody in the world. I mean, I know you're a genius, but you can't actually see everyone in the world. What would be
Maria,
some of the...
so sweet.
What are the I like doing this with clients who I'm sending to other people, or they might be going to other areas. Let's take chiropractic care for an example of priming them with some key questions to ask those practitioners if I don't know them personally to make sure that they are actually experts in their field. Does that make sense?
Yep,
What are some of the questions that you would prime people? Because there's lots of people that go, oh, I'm an expert. I went to a weekend course. I've had a period once in my life. I too am an expert. There are those people around. Maybe they haven't ever. They've never had that lived experience, but they watched a YouTube video once. How do you know? What are the questions to ask? We've aligned you listeners going, right, great. I've got it. I want to go see somebody. I've read somebody's Facebook page. It says they're an expert, but what are some key questions to ask them to make sure that they actually are?
Look, I'd want to know that they've got further training in women's health specifically. They might say that they've done some functional medicine courses around women's health, which literally might mean like an online course, sort of what you're explaining, Maria. And I think the formal training, I think is so important, but someone could be a medical practitioner and have an interest in women's health and be an avid researcher. And so maybe that could be their additional experience and they're really thorough in their, patient history and examinations and all of those sorts of things. But I think more importantly is I would want to know if someone was presenting with XYZ symptoms, what sort of things would they want to do and what suggestions would they make to be addressing that? So would they be looking at, targeted lifestyle changes, nutritional medicine, other strategies to help create that normal hormonal balance that we'd want at that time. So what sort of strategies would they be putting in place for that? And if that aligns and is congruent with their health values, then I think that's perfect. If they're offering solutions that are so far left field, or, and look, I hate to say it, if they're just, trying to paint them with essential oils or something, I would run for the hills. Or if they're only offering them, for example, if they're going straight down the avenue of hormone replacement therapy, then if that's not what you want, then there should be a long road until you get there, if that makes sense, of other tools and techniques before that's the final sort of solution, if all else fails.
So what I'm hearing is you want to find somebody who geeks out on women's health. And who researches it and is super thorough, and also is willing to work with you on your value system around how you want to work with health. So whether that's, for example, I prefer as much as possible to avoid taking synthetic things if I can. There's times in my life I've had to, because it's meant sometimes the difference between life and death. I'm not going to be anal at that point. But if I can avoid it, I do. So I that's what I'm hearing from you, is making sure you've got people that align with what your value system is when it comes to how you want to manage your health. And also that they really do geek out about this stuff. If they don't geek out about it, then walk away.
I think that at the very least, they should really have an understanding, a very detailed and in-depth understanding of the hormonal shifts that happen in perimenopause, and so why women present the way they do. And Maria, let me sort of unpack that for you so that you can, and the listeners can really understand why their hormones are sort of doing this,
gypsy doodles.
Sort of presentation at this stage. So during the perimenopausal transition, and it is a transition, not just physically, but I also think mentally, emotionally, spiritually for some women, there is no time in a woman's life where she's asked to upgrade in every part of her existence. And I think this is the wisdom that women gain during this time and into menopause, as well as to the new definition of who they want to be. So this is the time in your life when any problems, issues, anything is going to smack you in the face and you can't get away from it. This is the time to deal with it. And historically, this would be the time when women are reinventing themselves because, typically the kids have left home by then. They're sort of re-looking at themselves as to who do they want to be in this second half of their life. That's certainly not the case anymore. So sometimes there's women in the household going through perimenopause and there's puberty happening at the same time. Like, how chaotic would that be?
The force be with them. Jesus, I've got two dogs. I'm pretty sure Atlas and Coco go hide half the time.
Oh, Maria, you're such a woman after my own heart with your two doggos.
I know, right?
So the first sign or the first hormone that changes during perimenopause is a decrease in the production of progesterone. And the reason that happens is because we make progesterone when we ovulate. So progesterone is made by the corpus luteum of the ovary, and the corpus luteum is this little organ that gets created in the ovary around the follicle that we're going to ovulate from. And then it's that corpus luteum that makes progesterone. So it's this tiny little hormone-producing organ that we make and then disassemble every single month. It's so incredible. And progesterone is what I like to call as nature's Valium. So it's this beautiful hormone that keeps us calm, balanced, level-headed. It's a neuroendocrine hormone, so it binds with GABA receptors in our brain, which is all of our calming, rest and digest pathways. It also is anti-inflammatory and it helps to balance the proliferative nature of estrogen. So it should keep the bleeding, that we have during our period, it should keep that in check and everything else, if that makes sense.
For sure.
So we love progesterone. We want as much progesterone as physically possible. But like I said, we only make progesterone endogenously when we ovulate. So as our hormones start to change, it's more common that women will have more anovulatory cycles. So they'll ovulate possibly less frequently. So they'll have less cycles where they're actually making progesterone, which means that they'll have those shorter menstrual cycles. And because our hormones have to work like this beautiful symphony orchestra of balance, as progesterone decreases, we'll have this relative estrogen estrogen excess. And we always think that when we're going into perimenopause and menopause, it must mean that we aren't making estrogen anymore. That's what we always think of. But initially, it's actually estrogen that's skyrocketing relative to the other hormones that our body's making. So this is why women can get a new diagnosis of maybe things like fibroids or ovarian cysts, or they'll have really heavy hemorrhagic periods where they're just flooding, and it's because of that unopposed estrogen. Typically, estrogen is also very metabolically active. So usually when we've got good versions of estrogen, our metabolism will be ticking along really well. But as it peaks or is unopposed, it can suppress thyroid function. It can be a fat storage hormone. So it's very much like this Goldilocks effect that we need with estrogen. We want not too much, not too little, so that our body can use exactly the way we need it to. And it's also so cognitively important, not necessarily stimulating, but there's so many estrogen receptors in our brain. So this big peak or relative estrogen excess that happens with perimenopause is often followed by, these dips and troughs, which is why women can experience things like the brain fog, the big changes in their moods and everything else. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, 100%. Sorry, my brain's going so fast right now. There's so many questions to that. Why then in hell would anybody suggest that somebody puts an estrogen patch on when they're first hitting perimenopause? That's one of my questions. I've heard that before. If estrogen is if there's no blood test that's been taken yet as well, that's a part that there's a dissonance and a disconnect for me going, it just doesn't make sense.
And estrogen for a woman who still has a uterus, in my opinion, should never be used without progesterone. And so that is like hormones 101. If a woman still has a uterus and she's offered hormone replacement therapy, it has to be estrogen and progesterone. Otherwise, you're dramatically increasing your risks of breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, everything. That just... I need to make that really clear, because I've lost count of how many patients have come in and said, I've been told just to take this. And I'm like, but hang on, you've still got a uterus, so that's not an option. Sorry, Maria, I sort of just went down a little.
No, you're all right. I'm happy to go down the path. Let's go. We can go down different holes. I think this is probably one of those that moment for me where I realised that the conversation we'll be having in maybe a half hour, 45-minute time slot. It's such a scratch of the surface, but hopefully it's a start of a scratch of a surface that then people can go down a path that is more helpful. And it just also, I think. I had an experience in my early 20s when I was quite unwell and had some ticker issues. And one of the things that I was told by multiple specialists at the time was that it was in my head. It actually wasn't. And I, again, from the conversations that I'm having with other women now that are going through similar things, is the thought process, which you touched on, which is they think they're going crazy. I love how you put it, and I'd love you to say it again. It will end up on a quote tile somewhere, I am sure. But in terms of when we're coming into that second half of life, is that redefinition of who we are and getting to choose who we are in that space, I think is such a powerful reframe from, oh my God, my life is ending, versus, hang on a second, I'm about to step into my second half of life. What wisdom, how you phrased it. And I will have to go back and listen to it because you phrased it beautifully.
Yeah, I can't remember how I phrased it now.
I can't either. That was like amazing channeling. Thank God we record these things. In terms of getting that redefinition of who we are, having the wisdom to be able to actually make choices around that, because we're old enough and have been around long enough to perhaps make different choices than we would have in our teenage years, one would hope anyway. And the wisdom that brings with it, because you're right, when you said everything slaps you in the face and you can't avoid it, is very, very true. So I interrupted you at one point because I got excited about asking what questions we should be asking other practitioners without actually asking you, when it comes to getting hormones tested, what hormones should we be insisting that are getting tested? Is there a particular blood panel we should be asking for? And if we're getting fobbed off, perhaps asking somebody else, what should we be actually requesting?
Great question, Maria. And I like the fact that you made emphasis on blood tests, because I don't really think that saliva hormone testing has any value here. And the only time I'd really opt for urine testing of hormones is if I'm looking for estrogen metabolites. So essentially looking at how the body is actually clearing and detoxifying and metabolizing those hormones to look for risk factors for certain things. So on serum blood tests, we'd want to be seeing a normal sort of female reproductive panel, which is follicular stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, so FSH and LH. And some of the signs of perimenopause would be elevated levels of those, and they would continue to peak up until and then stay up and constant during menopause. So that's FSH and LH, which are pituitary hormones made by the brain that signal down to the ovaries to tell them what to do, essentially. The other hormones would be obviously estradiol, which is estrogen, and progesterone as well with that. Now, there's certain times of the menstrual cycle where we like to look at these things. So it could be like an early menstrual cycle sort of panel on day 2 or 3. Often we would do that for fertility purposes, but I do think there's value to do it at that point in time for perimenopausal sort of viewings, because the elevated early menstrual cycle versions of FSH and LH will kind of give me a bit of an indication as to where they're at. But otherwise, I'd like to look at those hormones about 7 days after when we think that woman might be ovulating. And again, for a normal sort of 28 to 30 day cycle, that would be approximately day 21, because that's when we should see that peak of progesterone. I also really importantly like to look at an androgen panel around this time as well. So our androgens are what we consider to be male type hormones. Women definitely need these at certain levels as well, not too much, not too little. So I want to see free testosterone, which is the amount of available testosterone there, with total testosterone, which will show me how that testosterone is actually converting. And that's a normal standard panel. And I want to see the sex hormone binding globulin, so I can see how well they can actually use that. And that sex hormone binding globulin also tells me what their metabolism is doing, sort of in a roundabout way, because this is inverse relationship between sex hormone binding globulin and your ability to either lose or gain weight. And I also want to see DHEA. So DHEA, again, is an androgen hormone, but it's made by our adrenal glands. And I call this the mother hormone, because it's what converts down into everything else. So it converts down into your sex hormones, but also your stress hormones too. And if we've got low levels of DHEA, then we're not having lots of good sort of adrenal function. And normally DHEA is low because often it's just being shunted straight into cortisol, for example, so those stress hormones. So from a hormonal perspective, that's what I want to see.
Okay. And if people are going to any practitioner that is ordering bloods and they're just saying, nah, you don't need that, perhaps that's where you go. Perhaps they're not geeky enough for this particular moment. We need to find somebody that's interested in that bigger picture versus just that one microscopic part of it, because it all feeds into each other. And I suppose that comes from a big difference between being somebody who's more coming from an integrative or a holistic background versus somebody who's only looking at reducing particular symptoms versus, again, that functional point of view and that integrative side of the nutritional medicine as well. In terms of I think this is where sometimes women in particular get a bit muddled, with that angry symptom that sometimes comes up, that rage. Some women would actually associate that perhaps with their testosterone, but it's more likely to be their estrogen being out of whack. Is that correct? Or have I got that muddled?
No, not at all. And that's certainly what we see with men as well. So aggressive tendencies in men is usually more associated with excess estrogen rather than testosterone. So when men get stressed, they convert testosterone into estrogen, which I just think is fascinating. In women, that rage is just an imbalance of all of them, and probably low progesterone levels as well, because remember, progesterone is that nature's Valium.
And then my next question to you around that progesterone is that I again, this is all the urban myths, and I was like, rather than me just guessing, I'm going to start talking to some experts so that we can start busting some myths for people. There's a lot of progesterone creams that are going around that lots of women are rubbing in all sorts of places. Your thoughts on that?
Look, traditionally women would have used things like wild yam cream. That's sort of like, and I remember my mum using that because it's, a very traditional way of using, essentially a phytoprogesterone, I guess, and is beneficial to some women for sure. A lot of women, and especially in our chiropractic circles as well, Maria, everyone's recommending progesterone cream, like a bioidentical version of progesterone cream. And I normally see people doing quite well on that for about 3 months. And then it will stop being beneficial because they're not actually addressing the preceding steps as to why that progesterone's low in the first place. And also we have to remember that every hormone has the ability to just be used for what your body needs most. So progesterone can be used as a building block for our stress hormones. And if we are just expecting progesterone to just fix all of our hormonal imbalances while we're not looking at our stress levels or our diet or anything else, the body will take that progesterone and just go, awesome, we're just going to upcycle that straight into more stress hormones because we're stressed off our mind. So it's simply just adding fuel to the fire.
Gotcha. And one of my most sad realizations of the last 18 months is the impact alcohol actually has on my sleep, my flushes. Yes, and I love a good glass of wine. I love a great Negroni. I've been booze free more this year than I've been not. In the times I'm going to give it another go. Today I've got something to celebrate. I want to drink. I did it yesterday, and then I got home last night. I went though, as I couldn't sleep and the flushes came back on. Why is that interaction the way that it is? What's your recommendation? I'll broaden it than my own personal experience, but it is my lived experience, and I know others as well. Are there certain foods that are more likely, certain drinks that are more likely to set things off, and why is that?
Maria, what you're experiencing is what every woman is just going, no, why can't I have wine anymore during perimenopause? And the longer that I do this and the more women that I see, I realize that unfortunately alcohol is a young person's game. Just as we get older, just our ability to metabolize and be able to cope with alcohol is diminished so much. And particularly during perimenopause is when you will feel it the absolute most. So obviously it's incredibly inflammatory, but it also increases our bad estrogens. So essentially like the toxic level of estrogen in our system, which is why you might have more hot flushes and everything else along the way. It also dramatically increases our risk for things like breast cancer. So there is a period of time where we're just not going to do well with alcohol, unfortunately. And it's going to have a big impact on our sleep and everything else, which obviously has its own health risks too. And the other thing, and I've got to look into the exact mechanism as to why this happens, but it definitely changes the metabolism and detoxification pathways of estrogen itself. So while alcohol raises the, essentially the quote unquote bad estrogens, it also affects the way our body is getting rid of the good stuff too. So it's essentially it makes us recycle the good stuff, but it converts it into the bad stuff, if that makes sense. Awesome. In a roundabout way.
That's great. It's really
because, I love a good glass of wine and gin.
So are you saying on the other side? Me too. Oh, don't worry, me too. It just doesn't. My line at the moment is I love it, but it doesn't love me right now. In terms of out the other side, then. Is there hope at the other side, or is it because I'm looking actually over the weekend I was watching the Blue Zones documentary on Netflix, and one of the things that is what's the right word as my brain fog kicks in is common, there's the word, common through a lot of the Blue Zones is the love of a tipple. Of a little glass of wine. One of the beautiful ladies in Ikaria, when she was asked what's her favourite tea, she said wine. And so is there hope at the I loved it. I was like, yes. Is there hope on the other side of it all?
Good question.
Oh, we might have to come back and talk about that later date.
Maria, I think that there's a couple of things going on there as to why those women can enjoy it. One, more than likely they're still living in their country of origin, and they're living in the same way that they have for eons. So culturally, nutritionally, they do so many other good things that kind of negates that. Their stress levels are probably very, very low as well.
Oh, what you're saying, they didn't just start up a new business 2 years ago. Oh, I see what you're saying. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yes. Or just, even plugging into modern life or the lack thereof for them would be very, very different. So I do think they can probably get away with it a lot more than what we can.
Fair.
And the severity of perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms tends to have a strong cultural implication. So, for example, there's in a lot of traditional Asian sort of cultures and populations, they don't have the same hot flushes and mood changes and everything else that we do. They don't experience the perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms that we do. And I think that comes down to a few different things. One is their BMI is a bit different. Their food is very different. And their culture is so different where they have this reverence for aging, whereas we will resist this with every ounce of our being. And we tend to value youth rather than that wisdom and experience and everything else. So I'm sure that all of that contributes to how they sail through this time with ease.
The other thing that has popped up, Siri keeps showing me regularly, and again, I like busting Facebook and Instagram myths, is, and look, I preface with, I actually find that I function better in life and always and have for decades with intermittent fasting or fasting fairly regularly, not necessarily all the time, but changing it up. I've not been a 6 meals a day kind of girl for a very long time. What's your thoughts around intermittent fasting? Because I've read quite a few things about the importance of it and the balancing of blood sugars whilst going through this period.
Yeah, and that is critical because unfortunately as we get older, our fasting glucose levels just tend to increase with age, and we definitely can't get away with the same things that we would have been able to in our 20s. Most of the studies on intermittent fasting have definitely been done on men, and men can do it until the cows come home. Their hormones are so much less of a moving target. They could fast for 18 hours a day if they wanted to, and not really have a hormonal sort of impact. Whereas for women, depending on their hormones and their constitution will depend on whether or not I think intermittent fasting is a good idea for them. Some can do it really, really well, and we might do it for periods of time. But normally I don't recommend more than sort of 12 to 14 hours for women with hormonal imbalances, because one of the most nourishing things you can do for your body to get your stress hormones down in the morning and support your adrenals is to actually eat a really decent breakfast that's rich in protein, good fats and fiber.
Great.
And depending on their stress levels, I might even encourage them to do that within the first hour of waking as well.
What's your take on coffee and all the good things, Dr. Andrea? Because I'm sure the listeners will be like, fuck, she's just taken alcohol. What else is going? What else is going?
Coffee, like my 3 favorite things in the world, and this is in order, is my dogs, or just, dogs in general, coffee, and then women's health. So that is
your hubby's in there somewhere, right?
Oh yeah, but he knows where he falls in that list, so it's fine.
Exactly. No, I want to say I'm very, very close in terms of the coffee. We just got a freaking phenomenal new coffee machine. That's a conversation for another time. I'm in love with it, but it's
you'll have to send me how exciting.
I will. Don't you worry. But yes, sorry, I digress. So coffee, women's health, dogs, coffee.
But in the other way around, dogs are definitely always
coffee,
number one.
women's health. Yes. I understand.
So caffeine can absolutely be used as a drug and has so many beneficial effects, but there are certain times for women when I strongly recommend cutting it out. One is when they're trying to conceive or they're pregnant. So because coffee increases the time to conceive when women are pregnant, their metabolism of caffeine changes and it does pass through the placenta, and the developing baby does not have the capacity to metabolize that. So we don't want little caffeinated bubs. Same goes for breastfeeding as well. And then in perimenopause, if it contributes to your symptoms, then I would suggest working out a way to either decrease or change it up. And I also have some rules around coffee. So what I'm always telling my patients is no coffee before 10 o'clock in the morning. Because of the fact that we want to wait until after that peak of cortisol that happens in the morning. So if we can wait to have our first coffee until after that, then you're not messing with your stress hormones, which also means you'll be using that coffee more like a drug, and you'll be able to ride that whole energy wave for the day rather than having that 3 p.m. slump, needing another caffeine fix or a stimulatory fix like sugar at that time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And is that the same with anything that's caffeinated, or coffee in particular? So some of the listeners might be tea drinkers. And I get that coffee and tea function in our body differently, but just for the listeners.
Coffee is definitely the big one, but if they are particularly caffeine sensitive, they may have to sort of push back all of their, because some women...
How does one figure out if they're caffeine sensitive?
It can be just the way their system responds to it, or you can get hints like if you were to have, say, a cup of coffee after 12 o'clock, would that keep you awake, for example? So some people do have this genetic predisposition where they are slow caffeine metabolizers. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what that SNP is called, but you can actually test for that to see if you are a slow or a fast caffeine metabolizer. So the fast metabolizers tend to be the ones that could have, a shot of espresso in the afternoon and it wouldn't keep them awake or affect their sleep quality. And that might be true for caffeinated tea as well. Normally I'm fine with patients drinking things like green tea or having some chai or something like that in the mornings, just because it's metabolized very, very differently than sort of what coffee is. But the other rule that I have around that is I really encourage patients to drink organic coffee as well. And in these day and age, it's usually pretty easy to access. It's normally about the same price as the non-organic stuff. And it's because of the chemicalization process that happens and the pesticides and everything that you use in coffee plantations. It's one of the most sprayed crops in the whole world. So there's usually about 250 chemicals that are sprayed onto coffee plants. And the roasting process does not eliminate that. So I just think that we're getting so many chemicals in every other form. Let's try and keep it away from something that we're having every single day.
That makes sense. Sorry, I'm just taking deep breaths as I'm working out how my morning routine's shifting, Andrea. But my friends that own a beautiful... No, you don't need to apologise. My friends that own an awesome chai company, I'm sure, are very happy that you just suggested chai is a good alternative. Looks like I'll be drinking more Tiger Pearl. That's a conversation for a different time. So far we've got... oh, it's really good. I'll send you some. So far... for our listeners, and I might need to twist your arm to come back on for the other topics, because I know that we're limited for time. Awesome, because I think this is a 3-parter series, because it's and I guess that I mentioned it earlier in today's episode, is that we start scratching the surface and then it opens up a whole lot more. But before we finish up today, just so that we can summarize for the listeners in terms of best steps as far as perimenopausal symptoms are concerned, at what point would you suggest that they start asking for these panels? Because one of the things that I look at for myself personally right now, I go, okay, I actually asked for tests 12 months ago, was told by a few different people I didn't need them. So I went, okay, it's not my area of expertise. I'll listen to the experts. But now 12 months in, obviously we don't now have the baselines of where I was 12 months ago to know what's actually happened in the last 12 months. I hope that made sense to all the listeners, made sense in my head. So at what point, symptom-wise, would you say to people, now's the right time to start asking for baselines?
Look, I just think that if you're not feeling as good as what you want to be feeling, and if you are noticing perimenopausal symptoms, then I would definitely have a thorough health check to figure out if there's anything else that might be missed. So, for example, if you're getting heavier periods, then we need to keep an eye on your iron and your thyroid function as well. because even just, the low iron symptoms can contribute to the brain fog and everything else that you've described, Maria. So it may not be just the hormones that are at play there, but it could be part of the bigger picture. So with those hormones, I'd want to be seeing iron, a thyroid panel, their B12 and their vitamin D, and then also just checking their liver and kidney function and doing a full blood count, and ideally just checking inflammatory markers too. So those are the things that I'd really want to look at to make sure that we're getting that big picture of how their body is functioning. So my recommendation would just be, if your body is changing in a way that you're not understanding and you don't know what to do about it, then I'd absolutely strongly suggest investigating.
Okay. And in terms of then, so number one is investigate, don't guess.
Yep. Yes,
first
test,
thing.
don't guess. Yes.
Test, don't guess. Well, I still take x-rays in practice, and the people that go, why are you taking x-rays? It's because I want to see what's going on. That's a conversation for a different time. But we want to test, don't guess, is to be seeing the appropriate practitioner for what's going on for you right now, and not just whack on something because Siri told you to, or Alexa or Chat GPT or anybody else gave you some sort of answer. Another story of recently, a client of mine had gone in to see a local practitioner who Chat GPT'd the answer, not even kidding, in front of them. That's a concern. But anyway.
Super scary.
That's super scary. But again, a conversation for a different time. But so is to be finding the right practitioner that can help you. And if you're seeing, and this is something I pride myself on in practice, if I'm not the right practitioner for you, I'll send you somewhere else and work on finding you the right place. So having whomever your healthcare team is open to actually referring you to appropriate practitioners, I think, is super important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And understanding that it's not a one size fits all, that there's lots of different nuances depending on where you are in the perimenopausal journey, as to what could be lower or higher or what needs tweaking. You mentioned lifestyle targeting options. What are some of the broad things that you start talking to your clients about?
Well, in my experience, so much of the menopausal symptoms that women get, I think, can be managed with diet and lifestyle alone. So the lifestyle medicine, I guess, is nutrition's a really big one, but we might go into that next time. If you're cool with that, Maria.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Let's get a little bit more specific in perimenopause and menopause, but having some really good stress reduction techniques. So if this is meditation, mindfulness, controlled breathing, there's even studies that show that parasympathetic breathing, and what the version of that I like to encourage with my patients is the 7-11 breathing. So in for 7, out for 11. The parasympathetic breathing done for 10 minutes a day can reduce hot flushes by 40%. So, that is something that is free, that is easy, that's not going to take any time. You can do it while you're sitting in meetings. That is excellent. And this is a time where women have to be moving their bodies. They can't get away with not exercising. So a form of exercise that might be different or new for them as well, which challenges their body a little bit, which is obviously going to help to maintain that lean muscle mass, which will help with their metabolism, but also good, strong bones as well. Obviously I'm a chiropractor. I'm absolutely going to be advocating for that. There's nothing that's going to shift your allostatic or your stress load more than, in my opinion, getting adjusted. So that is always such a foundation. And then just doing the hard stuff, like looking at the things in your life that aren't working and actually going, okay, so this is the time where I can't get away with ignoring this stuff anymore. This is where I absolutely have to start living for me and what my, desires and dreams and everything else are. So what do I need to change, analyze, or put in place to start to make that shift? And that's the hard stuff. And it won't happen overnight, but that's usually the stuff that keeps women awake at night as well.
Absolutely. And I
So
think that feeds into some of the other lifestyle factors as well. We talk about it regularly on Aligned You in terms of from a life design perspective and curating who's in your life. And I think, and again, personal experience, but also other people's reports of as well, is when making shifts around how one is socializing, how one is drinking, how one is eating, is you get pushback sometimes of why can't you just do what you used to do? And it's like, well, because I actually can't. I need to sleep. I've got shit I've got to get done. So I think you hit it on the head. It's one thing to be able to make decisions personally of how you're going to be eating, how you're going to be moving, how you're going to be thinking, how you're going to be breathing. But then that social connection aspect and having the support of the people around you is also key, and bringing them on the journey with you as well is so very, very important. We are absolutely going to need to have another sit down at the mic, Dr. Andrea, when you have a moment. We'll figure that out when we can schedule that in, because I think we can unpack some good stuff here that will be really beneficial to a whole lot of people. I am going to make sure I have all of your details in the show notes for how people can connect with you and the different courses that you have running. That people, I know that Dr. Andrea does public courses as well as practitioner courses. At some point, which I'll ask you on air because then it's more likely to get a yes, we might have one at MRC. It is designed for amazing. We'll see next time she's in Sydney. We'll get her to come in and we'll do some stuff if she's up for it. But before we go today, I did give you a little heads up. I like to finish with people's top 5. So your top 5 will be different next time we jump on the mic. But your top 5 for this episode. What's your favourite song at the moment? What's on high rotation?
Oh my God. I panicked when you asked me that because.
Oh, really?
I like.
Because you listen to podcasts. What podcasts have you got on high rotation? You're such a geek. I love you for it. What audiobook are you listening to?
What's that? Sorry?
I said, what audiobook are you listening to currently?
I am definitely a reader. I don't, I probably should get into audiobooks. I actually just finished, and this is not related to a topic at all, but I just finished the Wheel of Time series, and it is by far the best series I've ever read, and I'm making everyone read it. And I'm
Who's the author?
With it. Robert Jordan. Oh my God, I should know this.
It's all right. I'll look it up.
Yes, Robert Jordan. Right. And the series is so brilliant. I'm so obsessed with it. I've been living in that world for 18 months. And
I love it.
It's so hard to pull myself out of it. But anyway, and now that I've finished that, I'm reading a book called The Female Brain. And yeah, so that's what I'm on at the moment. Hopefully it'll be different by the time you ask me next because I will have finished it.
Well, it depends how fast we get back on. But yes, I would imagine that you probably read fairly quickly. What do you like to do to align and or de-stress and decompress?
So my 3 things that I do for that is just being in nature with my dogs is like my absolute favorite thing. I get adjusted regularly. That's just so critical. And I think for me, because of the work that we do and that we're with people all day, every day, I need those moments in time where I am just completely by myself and I can even just do 10 minutes of meditation or just breathing or something like that just to decompress. If I don't get that, I'm not a very nice person to be around.
Oh, I get it. I need tranquility. I'm enjoying Saturdays at the moment. So my beautiful wife goes for 30K hikes and I potter at home walking in circles sometimes just because I can and hanging out with the dogs. It's awesome. I don't have to do anything for anyone other than myself. It's an important part. I think that's a self-awareness piece also, particularly for those of us that are designed to be helping people and to be assisting in their healing journey. We're giving out a lot throughout the week and this goes across the board, whether it's however you're helping other people, is to make sure you're giving yourself oxygen first. So important. Have you got a favorite quote?
I'm sure I do, and I'm sure that it'll be so much more profound than this. But over the weekend, I was actually reading some Marcel Proust quotes, and there was one that I loved, which I just thought was really funny. It is that love is a reciprocal torture. And I just thought that was so funny, and it's just stuck in my mind that love is a reciprocal torture. That's just my favorite one right now because I think it's hilarious. Next time,
it may change. It might change. I mean, look, I'm sure we could dissect it and find the depth in it. Any final thoughts for the Aligned You listeners on their hormonal journey that they are on, whatever stage of that journey they are on? Because at the end of the day, it's a lifetime journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Maria, look, as cliche as it sounds, I think that putting in the time, effort and energy to be feeling amazing, because you absolutely deserve to be so. Our bodies are not designed to suffer. They're not designed for these horrific symptoms that you're experiencing and to always be in that fight or flight or super stressed mode or to have this crazy hormonal imbalance. Our bodies are designed for that hormonal balance and everything else that happens with that for life. And it's absolutely worth putting in the time and effort to get to that point, because I can really, I can't strongly say this enough, but that is that bliss point for women. When you do have those balanced hormones and your body is working the way it's supposed to, that's when you'll be feeling amazing. So it's worth it.
I love that. And that's a beautiful thought to finish on today. Dr. Andrea Huddleston, thank you so much for being a guest on our first, it's really my curiosity series, and assisting our Aligned You listeners with a bit more depth of information that then they're armed with the ability to be able to create the strategy that does align with their value system about how they want to live life. And if they're wanting to redefine how they're aging, whatever that age is, and wanting to take a more holistic and functional approach to that. So not just treating the symptoms, folks, but actually working on getting the constitution of your body back to a functioning state, then there's so much gold in what we've spoken about today. So thank you so much for being on Aligned You. All of Dr. Andrea's details will be in the show notes if you want to connect with this amazing lady. That's it for this week, Aligned You listeners. Bye for now, and I'll catch you next time.
And that's it for today's episode, Aligned You listeners. Remember to hit the 5-star ratings and share today's episode with your friends. And be sure to join our collective on Facebook and Instagram at Aligned You. Look forward to catching you next time. The information shared on Aligned You podcast is of general nature and for information purposes only. It is not specific medical or personal advice. You should seek assistance from your healthcare practitioner for your individual circumstances. Any information provided doesn't imply endorsement or third-party devices or products and cannot provide you with health and medical advice.